After a wild divisional round of the playoffs, we are set to have a couple of conference championships games this weekend that set up pretty well. We got the Chiefs facing the Bengals, the Rams against the 49ers. A lot of fun, a lot to break down from a DFS perspective to get you set for the final multi-game slate of this NFL season. Let's dig in and try to win some money one last time. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Joined here, as always, by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor of numberFire.com. Brandon, Bills Chiefs lived up to the hype. Other games that weekend, I think got a little bit overrated in retrospect, but honestly, like that Bills Chiefs game made it irrelevant. So I'm feeling good. Excited for the games this weekend. How you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. You really can't complain about the games we got last week. It does kind of feel, just being pragmatic here, being a little bit realistic, that these games this week just kind of can't live up to the hype. I agree with you where some of the games were a little bit, just because the game ends with a field goal doesn't mean it was a great game.
Like, do you want to watch Ryan Tannehill throw 3 picks and Joe Burrow get sacked 9 times? Do you want to watch no offense? Do you want to watch a guy with a bad shoulder and a bad thumb win a game because of special teams?
Hey, that
you might. I'm not going to kink shame, but that's not my deal officially.
Look, I get it. Like, we are primarily fantasy football analysts and fans, and we look at things. We want offense. No, I get
say that. That's fine. No,
like
offense. I agree.
We want, but like where we're coming from is we want points. We want to see good offensive plays. I get in the playoffs that it's engaging sometimes if there's an offensive struggle, but there's a difference between good defense and bad offense. And I always think back to that Rams-Patriots Super Bowl. And a lot of people were like, oh, just because it wasn't like a high-scoring game doesn't mean, like, this isn't fantasy football. It's like that game, like, the offenses were not good. It wasn't really that the defenses were good. So, like, if you give me good defense, like making plays, like breaking up passes, getting in the back, like, that's cool. But just bad offense is not the same thing. And I want to just kind of throw that out there.
I agree. Like, not every low-scoring game is inherently good. And I think that's where, like, that Titans-Bengals game, entertaining at the end, but I wouldn't call it, like, a good game
I'm not rewatching
necessarily.
That one.
Yeah, no. But I'll watch Gabe Davis absolutely destroy a dude's ankles for the 13th time. We talked about him quite a bit on the stream last week, and I had enough where it went really well. But, like, I feel like, so, like, my thing last week was, okay, these are highly volatile slates. I should just commit and be okay losing it all if things don't go well. The one place I diversified was with the lower salary guys. So while I was overweight on Gabe Davis relative to the field, I kind of wish I had just gone full in on those guys too, because if I'd been full in on him, Lenny, et cetera, it would have been a really good weekend. It was a very good weekend regardless, but like could have been even better. So a little bit of regret there, but like, hey, I can't complain being overweight on a guy who goes for 200 yards and 4 touchdowns in the playoffs in a loss, by the way, which is wild, but hashtag wide receiver wins. But I think that I want to go into this weekend with the same mindset where I am okay having every lineup not cash because I want to be committed to the plays I think are best. And I also think that there's a very narrow tree of quote unquote optimal plays for this week. So that's the way I'm viewing this slate generally. What about for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that we've been talking about more this season. And that applies on a full slate with like 12 or 13 games where, you can try to sprinkle in shares of everyone. But whenever you look at the probabilities of hitting, let's call it even 7 of your 9, it goes down quickly. The odds that all those guys hit goes down, and the more diversified you are, the higher floor, the less, volatile it's going to be. You might have some min cash sort of lineups, but that also applies to, and maybe especially applies to these smaller slates where it's like, okay, if you were just overweight on Gabe Davis, and by overweight, that means, let's say, someone's 20% rostered, you have them in 25% of your lineups, you're a little bit overweight on the field. You're not benefiting as much as if you went 80%.
60, yeah.
Like, and that, yes, that's that comes down to how many lineups you're playing, and not everyone plays multiple lineups. I get that, but like, even if you're playing 10 lineups this week, and the easiest way to talk about this is always with quarterback. You're playing 10 lineups, and you play 4 Mahomes, 3 Burrow, 3 Stafford. Like, you're gonna have a really hard time hitting on the perfect combination if your goal is to finish at the top of a tournament. If your goal is to make sure that some of your lineups have a chance, that's fine. But going back to the Gabe Davis conversations, like if you really took a stand, you have a chance. If you didn't have Gabe Davis, obviously you had no chance. But that's really what it comes down to with these small slates, is you got to take a stand.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the way I want to play things here, specifically too, because like I know having played enough small slates that like the odds I don't have the guy are pretty high even when I diversify. So like I might as well just fully embrace trying to hit the right combination with focusing on key guys. We're going to talk more about that and the games in just 1 second. But first, a quick reminder to make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. We are on podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, the Google Podcast, whatever it may be called. Honestly, I don't know. Either way, we're there. Find us there by searching for the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. We're also up on YouTube, up on the FanDuel YouTube page. So make sure you head over there and check out that. We are live on air every Thursday at 10 a.m. for these podcasts. Of course, it's the final multi-slate one. We'll have a single game preview for the Super Bowl as well. So swing back by then to get a breakdown of the single game slate for whoever may be there. Also, of course, on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, we have NHL, NBA DFS podcast via Tom Vecchio, UFC from Austin Swaim, PGA via the two of us, and NASCAR just around the corner as well. Also, of course, the conference championship DFS slate is posted over on FanDuel. We got the Rams, 49ers, Chiefs, Bengals. FanDuel is giving you a chance to get in on the action. All you got to do is go to FanDuel.com and create your own daily fantasy lineup for the NFL Sunday Million Contest. Play for a chance to win a part of the $1.5 million prize pool. There are a ton of cash prizes to be had, so head over to FanDuel today and create your daily fantasy lineups. Eligibility restrictions apply. Go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app for more details. Let's dig in now to the conference championships and get set here with the Bengals at the Chiefs. The Chiefs are 7-point favorites. Total is 54.5. The 49ers at the Rams is the second game. Rams are 3.5-point favorites. Total there is down to 45.5. It was 46 yesterday, now down to 45.5. Total's been going the opposite way for Bengals versus Chiefs. Injury notes for this slate. Darrell Williams was a full participant in Wednesday's practice with the Chiefs. Tyrann Mathieu did not practice due to the concussion he suffered in the divisional round. Could still get cleared, but that is not the start you're looking for there. Trent Williams did not practice for the 49ers on Wednesday. Hurt his ankle in the win over the Packers. X-rays there were negative. He apparently had an ankle injury earlier on the year, and I think there is a legit question of whether or not he goes, and not having Williams would be a downgrade for the 49ers for sure. Eli Mitchell sat, but that's kind of been his typical schedule since he came back from his knee injury, so would expect he's limited Thursday and a full on Friday. For the Rams, Van Jefferson didn't practice Wednesday due to a knee injury. He played 90% of the snaps in the divisional round, and Sean McVay said, largely kind of a rest day, so not a high level of concern there. Andrew Whitworth got in a limited session on Wednesday. Sounds like he'll be back this week, which is good because Joe Noteboom, his replacement, got hurt at left tackle. Darrell Henderson was activated off IR last week. He was not listed on the injury report Wednesday, which means he was a full participant. So one extra wrinkle added to the Cam Akers discussion for this slate. Let's talk about this slate, Brandon. I think that to me, the Akers discussion is pertinent because there is one running back I feel good about. That guy is Joe Mixon. Eli Mitchell, not a ton of passing game work. Left tackle's banged up. His role during the playoffs has been good, but not great. And then you've got Akers. Does he get scaled back due to the fumbles? Do we see Clyde Edwards-Helaire eat more into Jerick McKinnon's role? Does Darrell Williams eat into that? Does Darrell Henderson factor in here? So I think to me, the two key discussion points first are what we do with the Chiefs backfield and the Rams backfield. Let's start things off here with the Rams. Cam Akers, what is your confidence level on him if we assume Darrell Henderson is active and we don't get an additional word on what each guy's role will be going into Sunday.
Yeah, confidence is a key word here, because we talk about this a lot, where you have to balance what we know and what we are trying to project.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've seen some tweets this week talking about Cam Akers' workload being really good and basically showing his upward trajectory since returning. And yes, that's absolutely true. But he fumbled twice. As you pointed out,
situations, very key situations.
Yes. As you pointed out, Sonny Michel played on the final drive. Now, head coach Sean McVay has said, quote, he's got tremendous faith and confidence in Akers despite the 2 fumbles, but that doesn't, he could have said he's our guy still, which he didn't. I'm not saying that tremendous faith and confidence doesn't mean he's their guy, but he could have just said, like, no, he's our guy, which he didn't. That's at least something. So confidence level, not as high as it should be, for like making Cam Akers a locked in play like I had him last week. I don't want to overthink it, but what are your thoughts here on Akers?
It's complicated because I kind of want to know how the field will handle him, because I think, to me, there's a lot of risk. And if people are not accounting for that risk, then it's a situation where, okay, we get people being overconfident in a role. That's where it is advantageous to deviate. And if I get the read that Akers is going to be popular despite the fumbles, that's a situation where I am okay maybe being underweight on him. And by maybe, I mean being underweight on him, not maybe.
I think he'll be popular at 6,200.
I agree. I think he will be too, which is why I would be interested in being underweight for this week. I think that there's a lot of shakiness in his role. The problem is, where do I go if I don't go there? And I think that that's a key thing too. So I think, to me, the way that I view this is, I think the most likely scenario is that Cam Akers is still the lead guy. I think that the burst he has shown has been very good. I think that they have shown to us they believe he's better than Sonny Michel. The fact that he was still in there after that first fumble at the goal line, which is also a pretty big fumble, that says to me they think he's the guy who gives them the best chance to win. I think that they will go back to him as a result of that. But there is a lot of uncertainty. So I'm not going to make him a priority play for this week. And that's going to lower things pretty small with him. I'm not going to use Sonny Michel. I don't think I think that
follow up.
Right. I think that I'm not going to use Henderson either. I think that the most likely scenario is, if they don't trust Akers fully, they would rotate, or they would use Michel in like goal line situations. And like, that can be enough on a 2-game slate, but I don't know. I don't think he's going to burn me for not using him. And I also don't think the floor is great either. So with Henderson, he was benched for Michel before his injury. So like, I don't care too much about him, honestly. I think Akers is most likely going to be the guy. Let's talk here about the Chiefs, because if we are not going to Akers, if we don't want to commit to him too much, I have concerns about Mitchell a little bit. The other place to go would be the Chiefs. So we have this situation where it's Jerick McKinnon and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. If they were to maintain the same usage as last week, McKinnon would be awesome, because in that game, I just burped in the microphone. My bad. Sorry. It is January. McKinnon last week, 10 carries, 7 targets, 78 yards from scrimmage. He had 39% of the team's red zone chances. CEH, 7 carries, 2 targets, 69 yards, 15% red zone share. If we were to get that same usage, McKinnon would be amazing for $6,200. I'm skeptical we get that, because if you look at the distribution by quarter, first quarter, McKinnon, 100% snap rate, CEH 0. Second quarter, 60 McKinnon, 40 CEH. Third quarter, 70 McKinnon, 30 CEH. Fourth quarter, 64% McKinnon, 36% CEH. Overtime, 50-50. Clyde Edwards-Helaire actually started overtime. McKinnon got a screen and did well with it. So I think the baseline expectation for me is that CEH takes away some of the early down work. McKinnon still gets the passing game work, because in overtime, he ran 4 routes. He only played 4 snaps. He ran 4 routes on 4 snaps. McKinnon or CEH ran 1 route on his 4 snaps. So I think they split things where CEH is the early down guy. McKinnon is the passing game back. And that makes both them have paths to being okay for a 2-game slate. So I'm okay having a little bit of both. Probably prefer McKinnon because the passing game role is pretty valuable. And I think that he is pretty locked into that. But what's your read on them and how does it differ from mine?
Yeah, so McKinnon played 69% of the snaps last week, ran 72% of the routes. I know that we have to kind of do what you did and look throughout the game, see how things progressed. But, overall, that's a pretty good workload. And even the fourth quarter stuff just kind of makes me think that McKinnon is going to be as involved as CEH. And it's very ironic because CEH was drafted to be what Jerick McKinnon currently is, but Jerick McKinnon still should profile as being the pass catching back. And as we know, thanks to you, on FanDuel, a target is worth twice as much as a carry on average for a running back. So even if McKinnon's workload gets scaled back, he had a good red zone workload last week. He's going to be the priority in terms of targets out of the backfield. And within the context of this whole slate, if Joe Mixon doesn't really go off, and if the offensive line situation, just Jimmy Garoppolo's health caps Eli Mitchell's upside, you're not going to need 25 points from a running back because nobody's going to get there. So I would have McKinnon ranked over CEH. I think CEH is in play. But then the question really becomes Jerick or Cam Akers. That's basically what it comes down to, is where are you going there?
I don't,
because most likely we're starting our right. Most likely we're playing Joe Mixon at running back in a lot of our lineups. And while you and I roster a running back in the flex almost always, it's really not the right play to force it in a spot like this. And on 2-game slates, historically optimal lineups, we see tight ends, we see receivers there. You don't have to play a third running back. So let's say we're starting with Mixon. Then we got to balance Eli Mitchell versus Jerick versus Cam versus maybe CEH. So how are you viewing this?
Mixing, I think is the strategy for this week. And I agree with you, where I'm probably going to skew heavily towards wide receiver / tight end in the flex this week. And I say tight end intentionally because I think that Higbee Kelsey is really enticing to me given their respective salaries. So I think it's Mixing where I commit to Mixon. And I want to talk through the reason why I'm doing that quickly here. So I'll talk about Mixon and then Mitchell, and then I'll get your thoughts. The reason I want to commit to Mixon is because the Bengals have in their higher leverage games. So looking end of the season and during the playoffs, Joe Mixon has been very heavily involved in the passing game. Here are his past 4 target totals: 6, 8, 5, 7. That 8 target game came against the Chiefs back in week 17. They've been throwing more, but they've kept him on the field. I know there was that weird Samaje Perine, there was a pick when he was on the field in third down. That was the exception, not the norm last week for the Bengals. Mixon has been heavily involved. Looking at the games, 17 games for him with a full snap rate, 46% red zone share for Joe Mixon. Nobody else in the slate comes close to that in their most relevant sample. 98 yards from scrimmage per game. It's amazing relative to the other guys. So Mixon to me is I have to add lineups in order to not have 100% kind of guy. That's where I'm at with Joe Mixon. Mitchell, $7,000. That's a good salary for his workload. However, I see some paths to destruction here if Trent Williams can't go, because that is a pretty big downgrade. Mitchell has some work in the passing game, but it's not the most creative kinds of targets. He lost 11 yards on one of them against the Cowboys. In the 2 playoff games, 78 yards scrimmage per game. He has half the red zone work, but that's on 6 plays. They've run 6 freaking plays in the red zone in 2 games, and they've won both. How stupid is this? I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, he's losing some work to Debo. I know he still had 22 carries per game, but I think that there's a lot more fragility in Mitchell, and not in the positive sense. I'm looking at some initial roster rate projections, and they have Mitchell lower than I would have expected. I'm guessing that will change throughout the week. I don't know. Maybe it won't. But if Mitchell comes in where he is currently projected to come, maybe I'm more on him than I thought I was. but I think that there are very obvious paths to failure there. So that's why I want to go the Mixon and Mix It strategy. We'll rename it on the fly. Mixon and Mix It strategy at running back. So give me your thoughts on Mixon, Mitchell, and overall running back.
Yeah, so Joe Mixon is like he's the best play. We don't have to, say a whole lot more than that. My early simulations have him 42% likely to lead all running backs in FanDuel points on this slate. That's really good. Just pretty high floor, high ceiling. We know what we're going to get from Joe Mixon. I think that I'm a little bit higher on Elijah Mitchell than you are. We've seen the 49ers just commit to the run because they have to. Their pass rate in non-garbage time situations since Jimmy Garoppolo and Elijah Mitchell came back, 43.9% in week 10 and in week 18 combined against the Rams. Their pass rate was 14 percentage points below expectation based on game conditions. They're going to want to run the ball. That might not make them efficient, but Eli Mitchell should still factor in pretty heavily from a floor perspective. And we don't care about floor, but I think floor can go a long way. And I've already gone through. I can build Mixon and Mitchell lineups and still feel pretty good with what else I have. It does come at the expense of the receivers. And then the conversation is, and you have to do this with every position this week, is if you're allocating one place, you're shorting another place. If you're playing Mixon and Eli Mitchell, you're saying, okay, Cooper Kupp isn't really going to get there for a 9,700 salary on this small slate. Debo might not be 100%. They're going to get kind of stifled because Jimmy Garoppolo just can't really move the ball. Tyreek Hill is just okay, I guess. Jamar Chase doesn't really erupt. They find a way to limit him. That's basically what you're playing. I think there's a case for that lineup. That being said, just going over those receivers, I'm much more terrified of not having as much Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill than I am having like Eli Mitchell. So realistically, I'm still going Mixon with the mixing in, like you said, the mix it. But it does sound like I'm higher on Mitchell than you might be.
Yeah, I just see like, I don't know. I'm not as high on his floor as you are. I think that your point about floor mattering more is pertinent, and I agree with it. I'm just not as high on his floor because it takes a lot of opportunities for him to rack up points because of the lack of passing game involvement. Like he hasn't had more than 20 receiving yards since November 28th. That's kind of tough for me. So like I am okay with him. And like again, if he comes in with the projected roster rate at where it's at right now relative to Cam Akers, then I will jump ship and be higher on Mitchell. So I think that's kind of the key decision point is keeping an eye on projected roster rate for him, seeing where he comes out there and kind of reacting to that appropriately. I think that's the way I'd want to view things here. As far as the other guys, so if not going Mitchell, where do I go between the others? I feel like I have to go Akers, but I also am okay. If Akers is definitively ahead of McKinnon in terms of roster rate, I am okay jumping over to McKinnon and going that way instead, mixing in some CEH. But I think that to me, having Mixon be the staple, rotating through those other four guys between Mitchell, Akers, McKinnon, and CEH, I think that's the way I want to play things. I will have lineups where I have a running back in the flex if I decide to, just because I need some salary, if I go Akers and like CEH or McKinnon. I think that like, those guys compared to the low 6,000 receivers, assuming I already have T. Higgins in there, I think they grade out pretty well. So like I was building one, which was it was a lineup with Mahomes and Mixon, and I had like 6,400 for the final slots, and I could go with like Odell or Akers or McKinnon. I did wind up going a running back in that lineup over Odell, but I'm not actively seeking them out. I think that's, I'm trying to stick to two if I can effectively.
Yeah, I think the main reason to go away from running back in the flex is to get a Mitchell Mixon stack, or to play Akers plus McKinnon or Akers plus CEH, and then try to get an extra stud receiver. Which again, if this were a main slate, that wouldn't really be at the forefront of my mind. But on this particular 2-game slate and on 2-game slates in general, I'm there.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about receiver here, because I think we ran through running back. Actually, let's do quarterbacks. That will kind of inform wide receiver. To me, I know this will be consensus. So, chalk, baby. I think that the quarterbacks in the first game are standouts, and I like both Mahomes and Burrow more than I like Stafford. Again, though, like if Stafford projects to be low rostered, I'm okay pivoting to him, given the, you know, I do think that there is some appeal there. The reason why I'm so high on Bengals Chiefs is the first time they played, those two teams were slinging it. It's not just the total, it's also the philosophy they had in that game. The Bengals had a 76% early down first half pass rate. The Chiefs were at 67%. The two matchups for Rams and 49ers, Rams were at 52% early down first half pass rates, 49ers 37%. So more passing volume. I think that both these guys are pretty easy to stack, obviously, between Mahomes and Burrow. So that's why I skew towards both Mahomes and Burrow above Stafford. But again, I mean, if Stafford winds up being much less popular, I'm okay pivoting to him. So I know that's like feels like a cop out, but I do think that's an important way to view things for this week. What's your view of quarterback here?
Yeah, but I mean, we're not here to say like we don't give our locks and like ignore everything else.
Locks don't exist.
Yeah, that's not really how it works on this show. For us, it's more just talking about a lot of game theory, especially on these 2-game slates. And my slate simulations have Mahomes roughly 50% likely to lead the quarterbacks in FanDuel points, Burrow about 22%, Stafford about 20%. So that's actually pretty close. And then Garoppolo just kind of gets about 5% whenever everything else goes in the dumpster for all these other teams. And so if anyone's wondering if Garoppolo makes any sense to play, you are asking yourself what the odds are that Mahomes, Burrow, and Stafford basically all stay below 15 FanDuel points, I think, and Garoppolo gets you about 10. That gap narrows then, and then you can allocate salary for the receivers or to get to Travis Kelce. That's really what you're doing with Garoppolo. So I kind of want to at least address that and not just say,
right,
not a chance. For me, I'm not going to play Garoppolo. But that's what you want to think about is, what are the odds that this Chiefs Bengals game is bad offensively? It seems pretty low.
Yeah,
So
we got a question about weather in Kansas City on Twitter, which is a good question because one game is indoors and this game is not. Luckily for us, 44 degrees, 3-mile-per-hour winds, sunny. I'm very jealous and I would like to be there. But that helps a lot for the paths of destruction in that game. One less path to being bad.
Yeah. So to get back to it with quarterback, obviously Mahomes should be worth the salary in terms of projectability. The ceiling's there. I don't want to say floor, but like the floor is there. If you look back at that first matchup, Darrell Williams had 2 rushing touchdowns. Mahomes went for 259 and 2. Give him an extra touchdown. We see Mahomes run the ball plenty himself now. I mean, he had 2 for 25 with a 17-yarder in that first matchup. I think that gives Mahomes an element that it's something that he can do, but he doesn't have to do. And now he's open to doing it, and we saw what that could lead to. So Mahomes is easily my number one. I'm with you with Burrow over Stafford, although I will just mention that I love the idea that both Jerick McKinnon and Cam Akers are the same salary and that Joe Burrow and Matthew Stafford are the same salary, because it really makes you bear down and kind of think about what you want to do. Do you want to duplicate those lineups and do the 1-for-1 swap? I think that's not bad if you have a core. Yeah. And realistically, you're going to have players from, the Rams and the Bengals in that lineup. So you don't have to swap things around. So I'm very open to being pretty even on Burrow and Stafford. But that does go against the idea that I need to pick and choose my quarterbacks. So for right now, I have Mahomes expected to be in about, I'd say 75% of my lineups. And then about 25% left for Burrow or Stafford. Realistically, I think I would take a stand with just Joe Burrow, but I'm not against that, sort of the 1v1 swap that I advocate for a good bit.
Yeah, I think that Stafford is very interesting, which is why I am kind of hedging a bit, because like in a vacuum, I prefer Burrow because I just like that game more in terms of the game environment, but also like Stafford's playing indoors. He played very well the past 2 weeks. I think that's encouraging as well. It is a good defense and stuff like that, but I'm open to him for sure.
Yeah, and for me, I know Stafford's like, if you look at the box scores and stuff, and I'm not talking game film because I'm out of my element when it comes to game film, but
No, you were grinding tape with what was it? Who were you?
some CeeDee Lamb, some Dak Prescott throughout the year.
Okay.
But even like Stafford's big drawback in recent games was just a lot of picks, but he was actually decent from an expected points model, either numberFires or others that you can look at. He was actually pretty decent despite interceptions, and interceptions kill your EPA or your passing net expected points. And what that meant to me was that perception was going to be lower on Stafford than it should have been. And that's basically been the case. Now, I will say that it's hard to look at someone and say 29, 24 FanDuel points doesn't really have the ceiling, but he had rushing touchdowns the past 2 weeks, and he got to 20, about basically 25 and 30. Before that, even with those picks, it's kind of what I'm getting at is like, it's a little bit hard to narrow down what we're going to expect from Stafford. He's not like a 25 point passing only kind of quarterback at this point. If you take away the rushing touchdowns, which isn't fair to do, the ceiling's not quite there. So really, for me to play Stafford, you're betting specifically against Mahomes and Burrow. And in that case, then if I'm like, no, I'm going to play Stafford because I think that the Cincinnati Kansas City game isn't as good as the over under suggests, I would be actually very heavy on Stafford,
Right.
Because that to me is the real case to make for Stafford. If you're saying, well, Mahomes is going to be great and Stafford's going to be good, you're basically saying Burrow is going to be terrible, which can happen, but the correlation is not quite there. So
yeah,
realistically, I think that's why I might have very minimal Stafford, because I don't want to. I want to keep my exposures tight.
Oh, I think that makes sense, and that's a good way to think about it too. Okay, let's move to wide receiver and tight end. I'm going to lump them together because I think they do tie in pretty well here. Let's start with the value because we need Mixon, or I think we need Mixon at least. You're into Mitchell, which means we need to find some value somewhere. My guy is, guys are Brandon Ayuk and T. Higgins. I know if you are a regular listener to the podcast, shocker. I mean, back half of the season on those two guys. First half was a little different story.
Was that a genuine shocker? Because we've been talking about those guys a lot.
Yeah.
You specifically did not like T. Higgins early.
I said second half of the year. I've been very into the second half of the year.
Yes. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah. Yeah. Second half of the year, I've been very into him. The reason that I think that Ayuk and Higgins are like the two, Ayuk and, Higgins. Higbee and Higgins is like in my brain and I can't like get out of it. Anyway. Okay. The reason those two guys are the focal points are because they both still get good workloads. I know Ayuk in the playoffs has been rough. Last week, he only caught one ball. It was overturned. He fumbled it. That's not great. But overall, we look at the games since George Kittle returned and with Debo, Samuel, and Eli Mitchell healthy, Ayuk is at 68 yards scrimmage per game. Doesn't have a lot of red zone work, which is limiting, but he's down to $5,600. I think that is a very good number for someone with his workload. T. Higgins in the games he's played with Jamar Chase since Chase's return, 23% target share, 31% deep, 19% in the red zone. And people just saw Jamar Chase absolutely shred this defense a couple weeks ago. I think that if they go to the Bengals, it'll probably be via Mixon, via Chase. Higgins will still be popular due to the salary. He's not going to be like, given the Twitter discussion around Odell, I'd assume Odell gets more attention in the low 6,000s than Higgins does. So I think Higgins is very interesting. Final guy here to mention as far as value is Higbee. Tyler Higbee has a 19% target share in games with Odell Beckham since the bye. 13% deep and 11% in the red zone, which is not huge, but he did 2 touchdowns versus the 49ers. I think he had 8 targets total in that game. And I can
he scored in the other game too.
Oh, did he? Okay, cool. So I can use him without limiting myself with Kelsey because I can just use both. And I'm probably going to I think in single entry, I'm pretty likely to have 2 tight ends, decently likely, which feels weird, but I think it's probably the right way to play things this week. So Higbee, Ayuk, Higgins, the guys that stand out to me. What about to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the obvious that jumped to mind, one name I wanted to throw away, Ayuk's salary 9. Okay, so one thing that I think could factor in from a pivot away from Ayuk is Spiral. A salary of 7. Jim's making a face. I'm not watching, but so in Ayuk is at 8% not out rate, 71 out rate. Pringle, though, 7 per game. Ayuk 3.5. One team is going to throw the ball plenty. The other team is trying not to throw the ball. One team is team total of 3.75. Other team in this conversation 21. That's what 10.75 points, 9.75, I guess. So I think Pringle deserves to be on that list, attached to Mahomes, especially because he helps Mahomes. You can play Mahomes, and one touchdown for even 20 yards from Pringle within a stack is pretty solid.
Yeah, I mean, like, he's just so like in the games with Kelsey and Hill since their bye week. Like, I've heard people cite Pringle's target totals over the past month. You have to keep in mind that Kelsey didn't play one of those games, and Hill was active but banged up. But if you look at the games he's played with those two guys being like full goes, 13% target share, 9% deep, 17% red zone share.
Percent, yes. Percent, I get it. Volume, though. Like, I use market shares are going to look good. Also, I referenced just the playoffs.
No, I wasn't talking to you. I was talking to
the
broader Republic. I watched Boba Fett last night, so I'm talking about the Republic. Anyway, Ayuk 5.4 targets per game. If you want to look since the in the split I mentioned before, he's at 3.5 in the playoffs. So fair, that's very fair to mention that his overall numbers have not been great. But I just think the yardage upside is better. And like, I don't know. It's just so hard for me to get over the mental hurdle of using a dude who's like going to max out at 40 yards and over the guy who his like betting prop is 49.5. Like, yeah, from a probability perspective, the odds that Pringle out scores Ayuk are decent, but like, I just think that like I'm betting on the wrong stuff when I go with Pringle in that scenario.
Sure. Sure. 7 targets in each playoff game from Mahomes, or
3.5 from Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah. Like, there's more to it than that. Yes. Yardage upside wise, I think makes sense. I don't know if the yardage upside is really there at this moment because of what this team is doing.
Are you talking like as a pivot or straight up? Like you prefer Pringle?
Is it? Well,
because I bet you
Ayuk is not a core play for me because I have too many concerns.
Okay.
Like, they might throw the ball 20 times if they can. They threw it 19 times last week?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not out on Ayuk, but I do not think that he is as high of a play as like T. Higgins or Tyler Higbee.
Well, no, I think he's below Higgins. I think Higgins is a great option. But like realistically, if I want to get to Nixon, I'm going to need guys in the 5,000 range, and Ayuk checks that. So
it's pretty.
But like,
I mean,
counterpoint. Let's say I go Mahomes. I want to get in Tyreek and Kelsey. That means I have one more slot for a Chief. Like, we're gonna bump up against that cap at some point this weekend.
Yeah.
Do I go Pringle or do I go with a running back? Probably going running back because Although Pringle did get a Pringles endorsement this week, so there's that. Maybe that tilts the scales.
And then while we're here, hyper focused, I know probably how this is going to go, but Tyler Boyd 58.
Oh no, I actually like Boyd. I was going to bring him up. I'm not typically a huge Boyd dude, but like I think he makes a lot of sense this week. Looking at the games with Higgins since Higgins came back, 15% target share, 16% deep, 12% red zone. If the discussion were, will you pivot off of Ayuk for Tyler Boyd? I would have said yes, that's fine. I prefer Boyd over Pringle by a pretty decent amount, actually. I'm glad you mentioned it because I might have forgotten to talk about him, but like I think that he is the better play between the two.
I still think I lean Pringle for the sheer fact of being tied to the better offense with the higher touchdown expectations. Pringle's not going to score in every single game. It's just not going to happen. But you want efficient passing. That should be there this week. You want red zone chances, red zone targets available. And I think really what it comes down to, Pringle's scoring not because he's like converting these, as Jim would be the first to point out, like these 50-yard touchdowns because the yardage isn't there for a 50-yard touchdown. But
it's literally not there. He's not at 50 yards in a game with Hill or Kelsey, or with Hill and Kelsey both being like fully healthy since the bye.
But how many touchdowns do you have in the playoffs while teams are trying to limit Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelsey, stop everyone in the red zone?
Touchdowns are the most stable thing in fantasy football to bet on. I agree. Okay, so
you know what might be stable? 7 targets from Patrick Mahomes.
7 targets, 29 yards. He needs 15 targets to get to 50. Okay, let me read you. No. Let me read you his yardage totals since they're bye. The games Hill and Kelsey have been fully active. 14, 28, 22, 35, 37, 29. Like, Tyler Boyd has gotten a downfield target in his life. Therefore, I like him more than I like Byron Pringle.
Okay, so now we're on Boyd. But if we lump all three together, are we certain the 49ers will run a red zone play this week? Are we certain that they will score a touchdown this week?
Ayuk might outscore Pringle with no touchdowns.
The Chiefs are probably more likely to score 4 touchdowns than the 49ers are to score like 2. It's right about even.
Get out of here. Okay, I think Boyd's actually a good play.
I think the place we align most is on Boyd being relevant.
Yeah. So like if we get the read that Ayuk will be, which I don't think he will be given that he donuted last week, does that show up in his game log? I don't think it does. On his player card?
Yeah.
Oh, he had a target.
I like Ayuk, and I've been advocating for him for a while, but they don't want to throw the ball. Especially against the Rams, they've shown they don't want to throw the ball. Garoppolo is very hurt. We have all these reasons to believe that a 1 target, no catch game's possible again. So I just don't want to be overexposed.
Yeah. I mean, I think that like I agree with that. I would just rather differentiate with Boyd than Pringle. If he scores 3 touchdowns again, cool. It burns me. It's fine. I will use him to be clear, but I am much more inclined to go Ayuk and Boyd. As I said it right. I said it the way Tony Romo says Ayuk. It's Ayuk. I looked it up because I was freaked out by the way he was saying it. He says like Ayuk. It's Ayuk. So Ayuk or Ayuk. There we go. He's messed me up. Romo's in my head. Anyway, let's talk about the studs. The reason we're talking so much about the value plays is in order to give us access to the studs. And by studs, I mean Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Travis Kelsey. Who to you is the biggest priority of that grouping?
I want to say Cooper Kupp, but the salary makes it unlikely that he'll actually be the person I have the most exposure to. So I'm most likely going to be heaviest on Tyreek Hill because I'll be heaviest on Patrick Mahomes. And I can play Tyreek with T. Higgins. I can play Tyreek with Tyler Boyd. I can play Tyreek with Joe Mixon as well. So if I'm going to play a lot of Mahomes, I just want to be realistic here. I'm going to play a lot. I'm going to be overweight on Tyreek and Kelsey and Pringle. But I think that it really comes down, if I'm being pragmatic, it comes down to Chase and Hill as the top plays. And for me, it's going to be Hill.
I think I probably agree with that. Because like, I think about receiver mostly in terms of game environment, and the game environment's better here, which puts Hill and Chase above Kupp and Samuel. What?
But that doesn't apply to Brandon Ayuk.
It applies to Boyd. $5,600 is a lot different than 97. Okay. 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 I think it's really tough to decide between Hill and Chase. because I do objectively think that Chase is like kind of on that level, because we've seen the Bengals more willing to go deep recently than the Chiefs, which feels wild to say. If we look at Jamar Chase in the games, the typical sample I go to here, 42% of the deep targets, 23% red zone share. He's been kind of nutso during the playoffs too. He's at a 116 and 109 yards. He's at 100 plus in 4 of the past 5. The one game where he didn't get there is a game where Joe Burrow didn't play. He's kind of stupid in the most positive sense. My worry is that people will go there because of how much he shredded the Chiefs and leave Higgins more so in the dust. So, like, if I get a read that Chase will be less popular than I think he'll be, I'm very okay going with him over Hill. My baseline assumption is that, like, Hill went nuts last week, I think cheap people will go to Chase because of the performance that he had versus the Chiefs. So, deciding between the two, I'm leaning towards Hill right now, but I am very receptive to Chase and just being in on both of them pretty heavily.
So it sounds like out of the top, well, I guess if we're throwing in Kelsey, out of the top 5, our top 2 are Tyreek. So is Chase number 2 for you out of the top 5 then?
Think so?
Because he is for me. So then who's third?
Kelsey?
Kelsey, okay. Because basically what I was getting at is, like, where are you with Debo? Because you've been much more in tune with what to expect from Debo Samuel than I have. And I often let what you tell me dictate what I do, even if I fight back on it a little bit.
Yeah, so, like, the reason I like Chase is because of yardage. He's had insane yardage totals. And he can translate that into touchdown because he's an absurd player. Debo during the playoffs, 10 carries per game, 3.5 targets per game, 97 yards per game. He's had 2 out of 6 red zone chances, so 33%. But whatever. If we look at the larger sample of the one I typically go to with the 49ers, 97 yards per game, 29% red zone share. His red zone share is better than Jamar Chase's. But I think that, like, just again, game environment, I think the yardage is a little better for Chase. So that's why I go Chase. I would go Samuel is $1,300 lower than Cup, and that's a big difference if I want to get to Mixon. So, like, I might go Samuel over Cup, but it's hard for me to get to him above Chase given game environment, given yardage expectations, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think I'm going to be low on Debo just as a result because I can't play everyone. I'm just not going to play that way this week. And we talked about Chase going off against the Chiefs. Debo has had really good games against the Rams. I think about 27 FanDuel points per game against them. He scored, I think, a rushing touchdown in each, a receiving touchdown in the first matchup, and then had 4 for 95 in the second match. I guess I could have pulled up the player card. I was doing it a different way. But I think that's going to factor in. I don't know what his health is. He's probably going to be
He was a
fine.
full. He was not even listed on Wednesday, so that's good.
Yeah, but
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Yeah, people practice through dings and dents. For sure. You're right.
So he might not be at max efficiency, but again, it comes down to the just sort of expectation of game output. And again, I have nothing against anyone who says, you know what, everyone's going to play Bengals Chiefs because it's got the higher over under. It makes the most sense. I'm actually going to focus more on Rams 49ers. Play the angle that Bengals Chiefs is a little bit underwhelming. I get that. Like, I'm fine.
Or you could just play the angle that Rams 49ers goes nuts, which could happen.
Could it?
Yeah, it could.
Could it?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe if they
tight spread, one of the teams is very fast. I think that it's indoors. I think there are paths. Do I think they're the most likely paths? No. That's why I'm going to go Chiefs Bengals, but, like, they're paths.
Yeah, and if Debo is quarterbacking, because he threw that touchdown against the Rams as well, that 24-yarder.
I forgot about that.
So what I'm getting at is, like, with Jimmy playing the way that he's playing, which and maybe we think about this completely differently if his receivers caught some of those passes in the first half. He started off 0 for 5, 0 for 4 with, like, every pass being dropped.
No, with every drop back being a sack. He was 0 for 5 on, like, 15 dropbacks because he just kept holding on the ball getting sacked because, I don't know, that game was miserable.
So, I mean, look, I'm not actually saying that there's no chance that this 49ers Rams game goes over. but you really need it to be
You need
most
long
likely.
plays.
I think you're the sort of a realistic path for this game to play better than Chiefs Bengals is the 49ers get quick touchdowns, maybe with a long Debo touchdown. Ayuk obviously has the yardage upside. Kettle has the run after catch ability, maybe a special team score to put pressure on the Rams to throw the ball a lot. But if the 49ers play from behind, I still think that they're going to be playing slow, playing their game, try to run the ball, slow things down. And it's sometimes I see, like, I think about these games in terms of like, okay, I'm going to look at it on the TV and the clock's going to tick to zero at the end of the first quarter. Is like, I see the overlay being like Rams 3, 49ers nothing. And
I think there will be one score in the first quarter. I don't know what that one score will be. Yes.
and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, did it really, was the theory there strong enough to prioritize this game? And again, the probabilities are out there that this game is better, and you just have to think about that. And I think that it's far enough away that that's why I'm totally fine ranking the top 5 pass catchers to be Hill, Chase, Kelsey, I guess Debo, and then Cup because the salary's way up there.
Yeah, it's a salary thing for Cup. Like, I talk about a lot about the yardage for Jamar Chase. The yardage for Cup, like if you look at his game log, is stupid. He's had less than 95 yards receiving once since October 7th. It's stupid. Like,
Yeah.
I don't tend to get there as often as I should. That is not because I dislike his output. I just dislike his salary. Like, he's amazing. He's absurd. And if you know my previous sentiments towards Cooper Kupp, you know that is me being genuine. I would not lie to you. I will tell you what I actually think about him. He's great. So this is not that. Let's talk about Odell quick. $6,300. I think he's overrated in terms of DFS relative to Higgins and like the value guys, because this is just based on like Twitter. People think Odell Beckham is like going bananas with the Rams. He has not had more than 70 yards since December 13th. He has not had more than 80 yards since his second game with the team. The yardage upside has not been there. The touchdowns have. Now, the touchdowns have been there because they are designing stuff for him near the goal line, and he's converting on that. So I'm not saying that's fluky, but like, he's kind of like Adam Thielen, except people think about him better. And he's also lower salary than Adam Thielen. I guess we're going to go that way too. But like, he's kind of Thielen-esque, where I think that Higgins has much, much, much better odds of dropping 100 with a touchdown on our heads. So that's why I prefer Higgins. I think he's kind of in like the Boyd-ish range without the similar sentiment. A little bit better volume than Boyd, but the yardage is like kind of similar. So that's where I'm at on Odell. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, if you told me that like T and Odell would be at my roster rates, I'd go T all
Correct.
every day. But I don't know if that'll be the case.
Correct.
So I guess realistically, it comes down to, and this is something we haven't discussed yet, but just I don't want to say wasting salary, but leaving salary on the table. Are you willing to build lineups and have 63 for Odell Beckham, but instead you play Tyler Boyd? I think I would.
Yep.
I think that's something that probably doesn't get talked about enough, is like, yeah, everyone's like, oh, if you want to differentiate, leave some salary there. But it's like, okay, if you have 64 in a lineup and you are already playing a lot of T Higgins, like, would you just waste all that and play Tyler Boyd sometimes? Like, maybe. I think Higgins is a harder sell than Beckham. So if you have 63, like, yeah, I don't think that the gap is massive enough between Boyd and Odell, especially because Odell is very touchdown dependent. Like Odell or Pringle, who are both touchdown dependent. Like,
I was gonna say something. I'd stop myself.
Like, I get the case.
He's fancy Byron Pringle. That's a joke. If you clip this up, it's a joke. Hopefully it's a joke gets in the clip before I get roasted on Twitter. It's a joke.
I'm going to clip this one up for you.
But.
So, I mean, realistically, the receivers come down to 2 tiers. It's the studs, and then it's everyone else. I think that we already touched on the top 5. I think that T Higgins is clearly the number 1 non-superstar salaried pass catcher. No pushback there from you.
No.
And then it realistically comes down to Boyd, Pringle, Beckham, and Ayuk. Can you rank them?
So
I know Pringle's last.
Yeah, by a wide margin. If you look at yardage props over at FanDuel Sportsbook, #plug, hashtag company boy, Ayuk's at 49.5, Beckham's at 50.5, Kittle's at 52.5. We haven't talked about him yet. We should do that next quickly before we close up. And then for the Bengals guys, Pringle's at 37.5 under. Higgins is at 70.5. My goodness. Boyd is at 39.5. So I'm okay kind of ranking him that way. Using that as like the guiding light. Ayuk 1, I'll go Boyd 2. That's due to roster rates, straight up for Beckham. But like expected roster rates, I think people gravitate towards Beckham. Boyd 2, Beckham 3, Pringle 4. But also my lack of enthusiasm for Beckham also ties into our discussion before about if I had 63 left, I might just go Akers or McKinnon as like if it's like for the final slot. I could just go with
receiver.
That. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that's kind of tainting or going into that too. Let's talk about George Kittle. $5,800. You can put CJ Uzama in here too if you want. Because honestly, he has had a legit role. I've talked a lot about Higbee Kelsey as being a combo I like in the same lineup. I do think there are paths to Kittle being really solid here. In the first or the second Rams game, so the more relevant one, he had 7 targets. He had 10 yards on the 7 targets. So that's that. But also like he is kind of the type of player you want to use against his defense. So he's $5,800. He is a talent where if he gets targets, he can convert on it. That's not enough for me to put him above Higbee, but it's enough to say where even though he doesn't project very well, even though his like game log isn't very good, I'm still okay getting to him because I know it's within his range of outcomes to drop 120 and 2 touchdowns on me. And I think that's worth considering here because not a lot of guys can do that on a 2-game slate. So even though Kittle is not going to like, from a data perspective, look great, and that's the reason why I'm not enthusiastic to use him, I do still want to use him. What are your thoughts on Kittle? And you can talk about Uzama too if you want.
Yeah, so I've been having a hard time with Kittle. I took his under on catches last week at 4.5, and he had 4, but he had one fantastic.
It's 4.5 again this week, and he's at 4 targets per game, I think, during the playoffs. He's at 4.5 targets per game during the playoffs.
Yeah,
so
that's basically been. Again, that applies to the Ayuk conversation. Is it's really hard for me right now to look at what these guys are capable of and they've done in the regular season and apply it to right now because of the way that this offense is operating. And maybe all of a sudden Jimmy Garoppolo is just way healthier and starts throwing the ball. Again, he had some good throws in the first quarter last week. Maybe that continues. Maybe he builds on that. And then, shocker, the 49ers pass catchers have a lot more life. But as it is now, I'm not really seeing it that way. So I'm a little bit lower on George Kittle. Not to the point that I won't play him because he has yards after catch upside. All it takes is one is much more in play on these 2-game slates, these playoff slates than it is on a full slate. But Kittle simultaneously has I won't call it volume upside, but market share upside. He could get 35% of the targets and be like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. That's not going to translate into 12 targets or anything unless this game just is a blowout from the start. My question to you is, I know if we're talking flex and you have 62 left, you're going to lean toward the running backs. If you have 61 left, so you cannot play Odell Beckham, Jerick McKinnon, or Cam Akers, are you playing George Kittle? Are you playing Higbee, CJ Uzama, the receivers we talked about? Who's your top play in that situation?
Oh boy, that's a good question.
I think I'm going to face that a lot this week.
Probably. In initial builds I have, so yes, I'd agree with that. If I'm going 6,000 or lower, I'm taking a very long look at Kittle, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
If I don't have Higbee, I might just go Higbee too.
Yeah, that's He's involved in this. Yeah.
So I think the tight ends are hyper involved in this discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Is what I think that's the big takeaway. I think that Kittle is someone where, kind of similar to Akers, I'm okay letting sentiment dictate where I go. If Kittle's going to be super popular, I think he's a worse play in a vacuum than Higbee, and I just go Higbee. Like if Higbee's going to be a lot less rostered. And so I look at RotoGrinders roster projections. I know we're talking a lot about them, so I should probably say where I'm looking at them. I look at RotoGrinders typically. Frustrating thing with these is most roster projections are paywalled. So it's kind of a bummer. We want to make this like accessible to everyone. I lean on their stuff a lot though. If you're wondering where we look for this stuff, you can find them a lot of places though. But they seem to think, and theirs is like heavily data based. I know the way that like their process is very good. And it has Kittle being pretty popular. In that scenario, I would go Higbee for that final slot. Maybe Boyd. I'd give consideration to Boyd too. Maybe I just like Tyler Boyd more than I thought I did.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Sounds like.
Yeah. Huh. What about you? What would you do in this scenario?
So I was gonna kind of do a little bit of a cop out, and it's going to depend on the game I'm stacking. And realistically, I'm going to be stacking Chiefs Bengals primarily because I'm going to have a lot of Mahomes. And going back to the Stafford conversation, like the reason to play Stafford is you think that he contends with Mahomes, and if that's the case, then you're saying he's going to outscore Burrow at the same salary. Then what you're saying is the Chiefs Bengals game is either super run heavy or just doesn't have as many touchdowns as we want, as much yardage. So I'm going to lean toward someone like CJ Uzomah. Tyler Higbee's kind of independent of that because I don't need him to be part of this back and forth game. I think Higbee's the best process based play.
Yeah.
But I think CJ Uzomah, Tyler Boyd, and Byron Pringle would take precedent over someone like Brandon Ayuk for sure.
Pringle wouldn't, but the rest might. I can
know.
Also, CEH might be. Yeah. CEH is in that discussion too.
Oh yeah, I guess we didn't.
I think he's in that discussion, but sure. Okay. Chips are on the table. Who are your top priorities across any position for the Sunday slate?
Patrick Mahomes, in the sense that I'm going to be way heavier than what I think the field would probably be. I would assume usually like my slate simulations are roughly decent with like how popular guys are. I would expect them to be about 50%, especially looking at things last week. So I'm going to go like 75%. So I'll call him a priority. Joe Mixon, and then Tyreek Hill, I think, and T. Higgins would be my 4 top priorities.
I think like top priority for me is Mixon. Like if I am filling out a lineup, realistically, he might be the first guy I put in. Just because I want to allocate that salary towards him, and I don't want to use 2 other running backs. Like again, I've had the situation the past couple weeks where like I look at my, again, plug for RotoGrinders, their extension, and you can look on your FanDuel browser and see roster rates for your exposure levels for each guy. And I see, oh no, I've got 100% Darrell Williams. And I had to like change things up, thankfully, to like get off of that. And I think that Mixon, if I like refresh the upcoming tab and like look at my exposures, Mixon will probably be at 100%. I'll have to like find ways to like lower that a tiny bit, not too much though. I'm okay being very close to 100. So Mixon is the top priority. Higgins probably 2, which means I'll be heavy on Bengals, which is fine. No objections from me. The more I think about tight end, the more I think that I need to make Kelsey a priority, whether he's a tight end or a flex. Higbee's kind of close to that too. So like, honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if I'm like 60-40 at tight end versus receiver in the flex. I could see myself having a tight end in 60%. Maybe I won't, but I'm not opposed to it.
I mean, realistically, we have 4 tight ends in play. Like,
yeah, we do. Yeah.
And we have 3 value tight ends in play. And it's weird that George Kittle is in the conversation with CJ Uzomah and Tyler Higbee, but it's just like you're asking him to be hyper efficient on 5 targets.
Yep. Which he could be.
That's the scary part.
Exactly. So I think that's where I'm at. T. Higgins, the receiver priority again. So I think that's where I'm at for right now. All right. Any final thoughts for you before we send off the good people to fill out those sick lineups?
I think I got to say everything I wanted to say. I really wanted to make the point about like think about why you're playing Matthew Stafford and what that does. Like you don't want to. I'm not I'll say I'm not going to stack Matthew Stafford with like a full Chiefs Bengals sort of stack. Like if I'm doing that, I'm probably going to be lower on Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, and get up to Cooper Kupp, which I know sounds obvious, but like
Yeah.
it can be easy to lose sight of who's actually in your lineup when you're playing the best plays, and then you're like, well, I'll just put Stafford over Burrow because he'll be less popular. Like really look at every single lineup you're playing, even if it is, and I guess especially if you're using an optimizer. Before you submit those, look and see if those lineups make sense, because on a 2-game slate, sometimes they won't really add up. So that's one thing I would throw out there.
Or just build them by hand. To do it that way too.
That.
That is all that we have here for today for the conference championships. But as mentioned, we'll be back with you for the Super Bowl, probably the Thursday or the Wednesday. We have not talked about this, so I don't know. We'll figure it out then. We will be with you the week before the Super Bowl to get you set for that. That'll be on the FanDuel YouTube page live at 10 a.m. most likely, whatever day it may be. Super detailed analysis there. But of course, we also have our PGA podcast every Tuesday, 10 a.m. on the FanDuel YouTube page. If you're watching YouTube right now, A, thank you. B, hit subscribe. C, hit the like button too, because that does help us out a bunch. Also, make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed for NBA, NHL, UFC, PGA, NFL, NASCAR podcasts, all in the same place, wherever you can get them each time they are posted. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcasts. Big thank you to everyone for tuning in for today. Good luck to you with your lineups. Enjoy the football. We'll talk to you once again in the coming weeks to get you set for Super Bowl 56-ish, I believe. We'll talk to you then. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire.